Brilliant. Excellent. All right. Are we good on the stream? You can hear me okay?
Yep, we have.
Brilliant. Excellent. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you everyone for joining us for today's Product Tank, both in person and online. Today's Product Tank here is at the Clio offices in Shoreditch. So a massive thank you to Clio for sponsoring this Product Tank event for us. We have some great speakers lined up for you today. We're really looking forward to kind of getting on to them and allowing them to tell you about their experiences. Please, yes, I'll do the next slide, sorry. So just to tell you a little bit about Product Tank, who we are and what we do. So Product Tank was actually started originally in 2010 in London, and now is over 200 product tanks across the globe. We are the world's largest product community, by product people, for product people. We have a number of ways that you can potentially get involved with our product community. You have the opportunity to do what some of the people are doing today, which is to speak at an event. You can host or sponsor events, and you can additionally write for Mind the Product to share your kind of learned experiences across product, or if you're aspiring to be in the product, things you're doing to help you get to that point. On that note, let me just go through to this bit. So we actually have a Slido today for questions. Please feel free to take a screen capture of this. I believe it will be on the live stream for those of you who are tuning in online. For others, please do take a quick snapshot of this now. I can run back to it at the end as well for those that might need. Excellent. Brilliant. Okay. So Slido will be here. Please feel free to add questions as you go. You can also vote for questions, and then those questions will circulate higher to the top of the list. And then, without further ado, let me get into the talk for today. So today's talk is on product and UX. So if you're in product, you'll be very familiar with working with UX groups. But today we're having we're getting a talks and learning from the experience of those that work in both sides. So we're really, really grateful today for the Clio speakers who have come in and have first of all allowed us to use their space, and second of all are going to do some presenting of some talks for this session. I just want to check before we jump in, have we got any feedback on the stream around the audio? Is the audio okay?
No complaints?
No complaints? Excellent. Brilliant. Well, without further ado then, I will hand over to the Clio team to go through their talk. I'll allow them to introduce themselves, but Kevin, you're up first, so I'll pass on to you. Thanks, Kevin.
Lovely. I'm going to click on to the next slide. Cool. So I'm Kevin, head UX writer at Clio, heading up the UX writing team, and I'm going to talk about product and voice as this giant, very austere slide suggests. So for those of you who don't know Clio, which is probably most of you, because Clio is actually based predominantly US audience, so we're not actually available in the UK, so most of you have probably never used our app before, but Clio is a chatbot. So the voice is very, very important. So I'm going to take you through how we came up with that voice, how we use it in product, and how our users feel about it, and why I guess voice is important is what I'm going to talk about in particular. So I'm going to click on. Who am I though? This is a very existential question here to start with. So I've been 15 years or so working as a professional writer. These are some of the job titles I've had. And going through this, it was very clear that my career progression, whether I've gotten to where I want to get or not, can be argued, but you can very clearly see that my job title has gotten consistently longer over the years. I mean, this is just ridiculous, this length here. This is obviously abbreviated. But so I started as a journalist, have been 6 or so years, I guess, working specifically in product. So as a UX writer, and now a UX writer and conversation designer. On the right-hand side there, you can see some of the companies I've worked for. There's a lot of them. I've worked as a freelancer for a while as well. The bottom left, that's not Jurassic Park. I did work selling fossils for a while. So I was working, I actually worked as in Cambridgeshire, in the middle of nowhere, in a massive warehouse. I was hired as a part-time digital manager for a company, the boss of whom was obviously it was a fossil company selling fossils, but he didn't have a computer, so he didn't really know why it was there. I didn't really know it was there. It was a weird couple of months, but it was kind of cool because you come in every morning and he had 65 million-year-old fossils on the wall and stuff, which is really cool. But maybe not the best professional experience. But last 6 years or so I've been working specifically in product, which I guess is more relevant to this discussion. I'm going to click on to the next slide, let's talk a bit about that. First thing to point out, as I point out here, this bar chart, it's not necessary to scale. So I've split it up, we've got Clio and we've got the rest of the world. Obviously the rest of the world, this isn't necessarily how it's done. But just speaking to my experience, I suppose, working in product and in experience teams, it tends to be the case in my experience that you have quite a lot of designers, not necessarily as many writers, not necessarily as many researchers. So it'd be fairly typical, I think, in my experience, that you have one writer per product team, one writer per product squad, maybe a couple of writers, or sorry, one designer, maybe a couple of writers across all the squads, maybe a couple of researchers, depending. Sometimes you might outsource the writing, sometimes you might have some contractors. The nice thing about Clio, it being a chatbot, is that the product, the experience team within the product squads is a little bit more balanced. So say here we've got 11 designers, 7 writers, and 5 researchers, which obviously, I guess, unsurprising. Sorry? Sure, sorry. Unsurprising that I guess we have so many writers because it being a chatbot. We also have a lot of researchers as well. I think a lot of companies talk about how important user research is or how important users are to their product. One of the really great things about Clio is that being a chatbot, we can get out a lot of our chat flows to our users very quickly. We can send out surveys, send out questionnaires, all that sort of stuff to them. We can also segment our users very easily too, which is great. But the main thing I want to discuss is the voice. So when I click on there, I go.
Okay, sorry to interrupt. Are you able to just move the mic a little bit closer?
Yeah, sure, sorry. Sure, so the first thing, given that we're all in the Clio office here, is to talk about what actually is Clio, given most of you are probably unaware of what it is. This is a very giant chat flow here on the left-hand side. So what is Clio? It's an AI money coach fighting for the world's financial health. So that's our mission statement. She provides radically personalized advice and products which help users in ways banks never could. On the left-hand side here is a very typical example of what a chat flow is in Clio. So what you can see happening here, if you can read it, it's quite quick. I'll call out a couple of lines there. May I present you your bills this week? Beer isn't a weekly bill. Have you met you? Upside down smiley face. Move this money into your car fund. If you keep spending it, you'll never get one. So you're hearing that we're roasting people for their spending. We're doing it in a hopefully quite an empathetic way, and a way that our users tend to enjoy. So the idea being that we're educating them on their spending and hopefully helping them improve their spending too. You can see from this, it's a very distinct voice. It's a very clear personality. That's all very intentional and something we've built up over a long period of time. So if you're going to click on there, I can go into how we came up with the voice. So the problem statement when we were starting Clio out was managing money is stressful, difficult, and really boring. The secondary issue being that we wanted to challenge traditional subservient, often female chatbots. I think the second bit is really important when it comes to the voice. So I guess the word subservient there is one thing to call out. That if you think of Alexa and Siri and chatbots like that if you, they're effectively there to serve you. So like if you give them shit, they'll give you shit back, or they won't give you shit back. Whereas the thing we wanted to do with Clio was that Clio would have an opinion. So that it was a back and forth. There was a relationship there between you and the user. So that's kind of the start of where the voice came from. So we had this mission statement. We knew we wanted Clio to effectively have opinions, basically. But how we got there has taken a bit of time. So I'm going to click on, I can talk about some of that. So over the years, and this is not something that we had at the very start or anything. This wasn't like this character came fully formed to us to any great extent, but certainly over the years, we've started to define who Clio is. Now we have kind of loads and loads of documentation on that. So we have stuff like what's Clio's favorite author, or her favorite politicians, or her star sign. Like we get into those sort of granular detail. But how we sum it up is these three things here. So she's got your back, big cis energy. That's something we'll talk about an awful lot across the company. It's probably the biggest thing to sum up who Clio is. So big cis energy, as we define it, is someone that has your back when you need someone to support you, but also is there to criticize you, and like constructive criticism you need it too. Hates capitalism and the patriarchy. This kind of manifests itself in what we call modes. So I'll show a couple of examples of them, but that's kind of Clio at her most extreme. So we have loads of different types of them. They're kind of marketing campaigns. And you kind of see elements of that in those. And then the final one, she will invade your personal space. Or sometimes we'll talk about, like, Clio's the kind of person who'd be the first person to tell you your partner's a piece of shit, effectively. So quite in your face. I'm going to click on there, George. Thanks. So how we get to the voice itself then. So we take the mission statement, fight for the world's financial health, and then the personality, those three characteristics I just talked about, and this kind of gives us what the voice is. So we say devastating, supportive, and sharp. So devastating, her humor is frank, but always there to help people. So everything we do comes back to helping people. Supportive, everything she says, be it hyping you or roasting you, is built on empathy. And then sharp, she really knows your money. And also the cruel, cruel world. So everything she does comes back to how much she knows about your finances and is always there to kind of improve those for you as well. Can I just click on to the next one? So here are a couple examples. Now this may not be, this is admittedly not the easiest thing to read necessarily, but I can call out a couple of bits. So this is just an example of what I mentioned was the modes. So various points of the year, we have certain specific campaigns, holiday roast, so we have a regular roast where we make fun of people's spending, and this is specifically a holiday-themed one. You can see when it comes around eventually. There you go. So what's on your mind, Kevin? You're thinking about Santa's elves should unionize, aren't you? Solidarity. Don't forget about the reindeer either. So you can see that sort of anti-capitalist or pro-union message coming out there. On the left-hand side, we have money hacker mode. So this is sort of a gamified mode for Gen Z, which is our predominant audience, letting them know about various money hacks, but doing it in a sort of gamified way. It's very quick at the end here, but it's the specific tip here is talk about library cards, so letting people know that take out a library card, it's not just getting a loan of books. There's a bunch of other stuff you can get there too. So that's kind of throughout that. So what's the point of doing all this? Why are we actually worrying so much about a personality and creating such a strong presence? The reason we do it, and the reason we think it's so important, is that it creates a certain relationship with our audience. And this is, I guess, the really important thing from a product perspective, is that how this particular strong personality and tone of voice creates a certain level of trust. So to finish up, my last slide here, this is a little video from our users talking about how they feel about our voice. The one thing I'd point out before we play it is just how they react when they speak about Clio. So you can see kind of their faces, and I'll chat a bit about it afterwards. But I think if you hit play, it should hopefully work. Yeah, just the link at the top.
I need to learn about how I spend.
It doesn't feel like you're talking to a robot.
I really like when Clio takes out, I guess, what I can afford in my savings.
I like being able to see the breakdown completely of what I spend monthly or weekly, and the fact that you can edit it so it can be as correct as possible.
There's something about Clio that felt very lighthearted and relatable, and someone was actually trying to get your shit together.
I've been using the Clio wallet that's been rounding up my change, which is cool. I've been doing that for 4 days, and I've already saved $30.
She just makes fun of you to everybody. I think that's hilarious.
It does a really good job of breaking down this is how much you spent on food, this is how much you spent on bills, this is how much you spent on entertainment.
The eating out category, I've been watching it, and that's been a real kind of game changer for us. It's actually helped us save more.
I like the spending breakdown, and then also I like how it kind of prompts you to have conversations with the chatbot. Mm-hmm. Because aside from checking the budgeting, I would never consciously interact with this unless it prompted it.
When it hypes you and when it's asking you these questions, it has a more human feel, and I really appreciate that.
The game that Clio, that you play on Clio helps because then I see how much I'm spending a lot of times at certain places and I don't realize how much I'm spending until I see it.
Nobody would be able to put me in check like Clio do.
So you can see a couple of things there. When people are referring to Clio, they have a smile on their face. They also talk about Clio as she and her, so they you can quite clearly see there is a relationship there, and that's, I guess, ultimately what the USP of our app is. People talk about that the USP is the voice itself. Well, actually, I think it's more the relationship that the voice creates with the user. So you can kind of see that throughout. I guess a potential drawback of that from our side of things on the writing side of things is that we have a temptation to use it everywhere. So you once you have a voice that's distinct and people tend to react so well to it, you want to use it in emails, you want to use it in social media, you want to use it in UI screens all the time. And that can potentially create some issues. But the other, I guess, thing as well is that having such a big experience team and unusually, I guess, big sort of research and writing teams means those relationships are quite important as well. And that's where it comes down to the PM to make sure that those relationships are working correctly and are properly collaborative and stuff as well. So I will hand you over to our next speaker, Laddie here, who's going to take you through all that stuff.
Hello everyone, can you hear me? Sweet. This feels good actually. Damn. Do you reckon this is how Steve Jobs feels when he's just... But no, I'm Laddie. I'm going to be speaking to you all about empowering your UX team to drive the right outcomes. So as Kevin said, we've got a massive product squad, or each product squad is massive in the sense that we've got UX writers. In my team, I've got 2 UX writers, 1 product designer, 1 user researcher, along with my product analyst and the engineering team. So there are a lot of opinions, and it's really important to sort of try and find that right balance as a product manager. But for me, I think it's definitely all about empowering the team, especially the UX team. And so next slide, please. So just a little bit about me. My name is Laddie, for those who don't remember when I said it 2 minutes ago. I started off my career actually in university at an agri-tech startup focused on basically, if you think of Deliveroo as between consumers, drivers, and the restaurants, this is a marketplace from B2B wholesalers and producers to the QSR companies. When I graduated university, I had a short stint in Credit Suisse, where I covered European banks, before moving on to a late-stage consumer tech VC called Process. And there I was basically just helping the fintech portfolio either get ready for new fundraisers or with special situations. So fast forward to 2019, I joined Clio, and I shit you not, on my first day, they put a bunch of interns in the room and they were like, hey, can you tell them about how the company works? And I'm like, what? But thankfully I passed probation and I was able to stay on. And in 2020, I joined my first product role. And in classic Clio fashion, my first product role was basically building the premium Clio Builder tier, which is basically a $14.99 subscription tier, alongside the Credit Builder card, which is basically a secured credit card that helps subprime or people with low credit scores build credit. So that was a really interesting experience, and I've now been in this role for about 2.5 years. Next slide, please. So the confession to begin with is I used to be the everything guy. You know, being a junior product manager, you don't really know what you're doing, so you want to try and signal to your team that you're adding value. So I'd be writing SQL queries, doing wireframes on Figma, trying to unblock the engineers with God knows what, like what's an API. And yeah, this is a post that my front-end developer tagged me and my designer in, and basically my team takes them, used to take the mick out of me quite a lot. Next slide, please. So I guess there are quite a few trade-offs to being the everything guy. So to start with, I was deprioritizing leverage. So as a product manager, I think you really want to be in that space of setting a compelling vision, trying to work out your product strategy, communicating that to senior stakeholders and trying to get buy-in, turning that into long-term roadmaps. But what was Laddie doing? Writing SQL queries and wireframing. And it's quite embarrassing, but on a personal level, I felt unbelievably burnt out. So basically, I keep a photo journal where I basically just take a selfie of myself on random days and just put my mood out. And that's what I said, or what I captioned in November 2021. My brain feels so cluttered. It feels like I'm doing so much, but nothing at all. And we got my manager in the back, Ash, he's like, yeah. But next slide, please. So aside from that, like being, I suppose, with trying to be the everything guy, it had impacts on me professionally and personally, but there were also certain members of my team who were impacted by the way I was behaving. So I guess if you start with the PM getting more involved than necessary, you then have certain members of the team who just don't feel any sense of ownership. They become disengaged with what we're trying to do. And I guess that leads to poor quality output and then erosion of trust on both sides. And then it just goes all the way to me doing sort of more work than necessary. And next slide, please. I think for me, going into 2022, a big personal KPI was, well, how do I actually empower my team to drive the right outcomes so I can focus on leverage, so I can not be burnt out? Bear in mind, I'm only 2.5 years into this job. I'm sure all of you have it all figured out, but this was a big thing for me. So between January and June 2022, after sort of focusing on this for quite a while and trying to really improve the way our ways of working, I think these are my big 3 learnings. 1, co-creating on product strategy. 2, encouraging micro partnerships throughout the development cycle. And 3, in execution, just giving the team space to go off-piste. So I'll go into more detail on those. So, co-creating on product strategy. I think at the start of a new quarter, the everything guy or the old laddie would start scrambling with a product analyst or a data analyst. Where's the leverage? How can we sort of drive drive towards business outcomes? But I guess in January 2022, a bit of a change was actually we got the whole team in a room, UX team included, and we started with where Clio is trying to get to. We want to improve 12-month lifetime value, improve revenue per subscriber. And I guess for that exercise, the product analyst was leading, but the whole point was trying to basically find where our sphere of influence is and how we can sort of impact the business positively. And we kept drilling down. Obviously, as an activation squad, month 0 retention is probably the most important for us, and card activity is the most important way that we could possibly drive revenue per subscriber. And then ultimately, I think North Stars, OKRs, that's what, depending on what it's called in your company, but we almost settled as a team on sort of these core actions, sort of adding a certain amount of money within a certain period and activating your physical card within a certain period. And I think the big marked change from how I like doing this process with my team or with my wider UX team is I initially thought, oh, they're not going to want to care. They can be spending their time doing other things or doing, I suppose, focused on leverage. But what I didn't realize is by sort of going through this process with them, we were coming to that shared understanding of the outcomes that we were trying to drive. And what I thought was really cool was like, after the meeting, just sort of hearing in other meetings or in conversations between UX researchers, like, is this within our sphere of influence, or is this how does this impact the core action that we're trying to drive? So I think on co-creation, I think coming to that focus area together is probably one important thing. And then next up is basically understanding, ideating, and strategizing together. So once we defined the focus area, it was then completely on my UX team, design, research, copy. Okay, guys, how are we going to get there? And we started with the outcome that we're trying to drive. And shout out to Teresa Torres with her Opportunity Solution Trees. And what you have here is basically a really watered down version of a couple of sessions that my team led, the researchers and the copywriters and the designers, in terms of trying to understand what the pain points were. So what's crazy is that they started working with the analyst in terms of sizing the opportunities. Once we had an understanding of what the opportunities were, we understood where to sort of focus our efforts before sort of moving to the solution and nice ideation section. And I guess by the end of this process, I think it took about a week and a half, two, of loads of user research, loads of sort of going back and forth as a team. But we were able to come to some sort of product strategy that was rooted in the outcome that we were trying to drive, and also what we understand about our users. And I have to give a big shout out to my UX team, of which Kevin was a part. They did a fantastic job in really helping the team understand the pain points of our customers and how we can sort of, get to that outcome. So that's a little bit on sort of co-creating on product strategy. I would say the next one is encouraging micro partnerships. So if you think about you've got your OKRs, you've got your product strategy, your roadmap, you know where you want to be at certain points in the quarter. Everyone says, oh, you prioritize things within this holy trinity of product, design, and technology. And I think, bear in mind, I'm only 2 years in, so don't quote me, but I would challenge that in saying that that holy trinity is helpful for prioritization on sort of bigger features, understanding that impact effort trade-off. However, I think where we were trying to get to as a team was having these micro partnerships throughout the process of just shipping one feature or one experiment. So if you think about where the old laddie would have been, you would have had throughout the process, discovery, dev handover, implementation, loads of product questions. This is a product question, adding laddie on Slack, and it's very clear that the team just didn't feel empowered. However, what I realized is that for me, leverage is basically set at the product kickoff stage. So basically, you want to set as much context and give people free rein to, I guess, flex their skills. And once we move into discovery, I think I love seeing the partnerships between insights. So that's my UX researcher, product analyst, and design. Because then they started asking questions to each other. Well, how do these set of users behave? Or just loads of questions that were helping to refine the designs and refine, I suppose, whatever it is that we were trying to build. And so that's an example of one micro partnership. And then another example is the collaboration between UX and engineering. So I think no one wants to be in a situation where you build or you design something and the engineers are telling you, what are you doing? This is completely unfeasible. And I think having that micro partnership between your designers and copywriters, just checking in with your engineers constantly, like, yo, how does this work? How does this payment input component work? Basically checking for feasibility. I think it was definitely driving us towards the right outcomes. And then at the implementation stage, so once we've handed over a design that's ready to be shipped, I think what was really cool to see across the team was everybody, so coming into the testing party, and at this point, we're all trying to break the feature. the developers get quite annoyed, like, you're overdoing it, this is such an edge case, but nah, fuck it. We're breaking that feature. And I think that's just another example of the testing parties before you ship a feature, and having that opportunity from the engineers to sort of get feedback from the designers on the implementation before we go to shipping. I know there's a whole stage of measuring, learning, reiterating, but there wasn't any space on the slides. So yeah, I think that's just a little sort of tidbit about encouraging micro partnerships just throughout the development cycle. And finally, my least favorite, basically creating space for your team to go off-piste. So the old laddie would try and manage scope. Anything where there's a high margin for error, we probably want to de-scope on this a little bit, try and protect the engineer's time. But I just didn't realize, and I guess it took an uncomfortable conversation with one of my designers that I was blocking their ability to drive us towards that outcome. And so I think what I want to say is we had the benefit of hitting or getting close to our OKRs, and we started introducing this concept called, well, what does the wildcard variant look like in any experiment that we would want to run? So here's an example, for example. So the problem with new card holders is they order their card, they activate the cards, but they don't really deposit. They don't deposit any money on the card. And we see that the deposit utilization rate is super high. So if a customer puts money on the card, they're definitely going to spend it. But the problem is people aren't putting money on the card just yet because they haven't really developed that use case, and they don't really know what to be using the card for just yet. So the team came up with a hypothesis that if we anchor, or by anchoring our customers with their past spending, they're more likely to understand, I suppose, the possibility of what this card could be used for, and therefore they'll be more likely to deposit money. And as a product manager, you love seeing this type of variant. So this is the existing screen. All there is a suggest amount button. As soon as the user clicks the suggest amount button, there's a spinner that says, hey, you spent this on this merchant or this category. But then when you create space for the team to go off-piste, this was actually a collaboration between design, copy, and user research, which is basically the chat spin on the problem that we are trying to solve. We know Clio customers love the voice. They love how differentiated the differentiated way that Clio can speak to you and sort of advise you. And so here they were trying to merge the voice or the chat experience with UI to sort of help the customer or prompt the customer to make a deposit in an area they're familiar with. And obviously when I see this, I'm like, slap me sideways, you lot are crazy. How the hell do we build this? Da 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 da. In the end, we ended up building it, and what you can see there is just the results. A 73% uplift in successful deposits above $30 within the first 14 days. And I can't take any credit whatsoever from this. It was all collaboration between design, user research, our copywriters, and just, I suppose, giving them that space to go off-piste and really flex their skills. And yeah, I think that's pretty much all we have for today. And what I will say is that basically in an empowered team, everyone wins. So fast forward to the next product, next performance review, bare promotions, engineers getting promoted. Kev, my guy, head of UX writing, lead designers, lead researchers. And I think for me, that key learning over a 6-month period is like, who knows what can happen when you just take yourself out of the process and really empower your team to flex their skills. And yeah, that's pretty much it from me. Thank you very much, folks. Thank you. And I'll pass over to Janina now, who's basically going to be talking more about collaboration in practice and how that actually turns it.
Thanks, Laddie. Okay. Hey, everyone. Thanks for coming. Am I good? Can you hear me in the back? Excellent. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about all the things that Kevin talked about, all the things that Laddie talked about, and actually present that in a use case of a recent project. Next slide, please. So, hey, I'm Janina. You can call me Nina. I am from Canada. I worked for 6 years as a copywriter in advertising and travel, so mostly working on digital campaigns, ad campaigns, scripts, all that fun business stuff. When I moved to the UK in 2019, I really wanted to work for a company that cared about its users, that brought like empathy and emotion into the process. Clio found me, and that was really exciting. So for the past 3 years, I've been working within like chatbot dialogue, building our budget tool, and currently I'm working on financial health coaching as a new feature that we're offering. We're testing it this week, so fingers crossed. And next up, I'll be talking to you about chat. Next slide, please. So how do we actually write for chat? Kevin touched on this a little bit, but I'll go into it deeper. So the insight, or the chat flow that you see on the right is actually a chat flow that my co-writer wrote around teaching people very simple guidelines around how to manage a budget. This is part of a larger project called the Insights Feed, where users are served daily insights about like how to learn about their spending, how they're spending lately, how to like budget better, how to save on gas, like quick tips. Next slide, please. So the first principle that we like to follow is to always have user empathy. This doesn't actually just extend to writers. This involves every single person on the team. Whether you're a PM, a designer, an analyst, an engineer, you always have to care about the user at the end of the day. Next. So within that, we have to remember to go easy on the mental load. I'm sure this is true of like any industry, but fintech especially, the user is going through a lot of potential duress while they're learning about their money. So while we're presenting them information, we have to remind ourselves that we can't overload them too much. They're human after all. They might be time poor just going through these insights, just learning things. So that's always a collaboration between ourselves and the designers and the engineers to make sure that things go smoothly. And to the next point, don't forget about number blindness. This just means don't put too many numbers on a screen. And I know that this is kind of like contradictory to it because there's a lot of numbers on there, but we try our best to make sure that numbers are quite simple and that the user always has a singular takeaway at the end of every screen. So the way we generally structure our chat flows is Clio presents information, the user reacts or accepts it, and then Clio recommends a following action. That's how we've treated insights throughout this process, and I think we plan to do that for the future, hopefully. Next slide, please. So how voice meets design. I wanted to present an actual thing that we made. So we were faced with the problem. Payday, which is today for a lot of us, yay, is a time when users are engaged with their money, but the experience we serve doesn't give them answers to their money questions. So this is directly referring to the fact that they get their budget, they get the notification that's like, hey, you got paid today. What can they actually do about it? So on Payday, we've started serving something called Budget Rewind, which is basically Spotify Wrapped, but for your spending. And these are just an example of 2 screens from it, where we deliver users this very like bite-sized, approachable information about things like their spendiest day, their thriftiest day, a gamified experience around how many times they actually spent their money during that pay cycle. And that's meant to give them this kind of digestible information to take away so that they can then feel empowered to like spend better in their next pay cycle. So this was a collaboration between writing and design, and obviously a lot of back and forth with dev, with analytics, and user research to make sure that it actually worked for our users. Next slide, please. So actually, out of that came this interesting concept, which we call rich chat. So in the past screens, you've seen chat be quite plain. There's not a lot of graphics. the voice is quite like front and center. We wanted to make an experience where users not only got to take away information, but they were able to, or not only got to experience Clio's voice, but they were able to like take away information in a visual mode. This is because a lot of our users we found are quite visual. So I'll walk you through each one. The first one is, here are the top 3 merchants where you're blowing your money. And you can see like your top 3 merchants with Clio's like signature tone of voice with that middle finger up. And then the second one is you're averaging $45 per day. We see a graph where they can see how their average spending compares to their spending day per day. And that's a really cool way for a user to kind of like compare themselves against themselves. And then this last one is the gamified experience I was talking about, which is how many times do you think you spent since your last paycheck? And you can actually like kind of slide through each one in a carousel and pick it. I got mine right today, so I'm very proud of that. Next slide, please. But when it comes to building these kinds of experiences for users, a lot of people forget that there's a lot of like back end to this. So when we initially built Budget Rewind, it was entirely hard-coded, which was quite difficult. It was a lot of back and forth, and we wanted to make a way to streamline this. So this is a screenshot of a tool that we built. I did not build, the engineers built, called Halo. This actually allows us to build what you just saw, just as writers. So we actually don't have to engage engineers at all when we build this, which is quite great. What I loved about this project was that I had a designer sit with me for like 3 weeks, maybe not that long, but about a few weeks, just asking questions, just being like, okay, what are you facing? What do you want to do? So as a writer, as a UX writer, being treated as a user was just like completely invaluable. I have never experienced that in any other company, and I can tell you that it makes me want to work better, so it's good. Can you hit the next slide, please? Of course, this ends up turning into like quite a collaborative process, because as you build things, more bugs come, more things need to be solved, you discover questions. What I found really rewarding about this job is actually working with engineers and like people, especially with back-end or working in the back end, because I find that people often forget about the link between UX writing and the back-end development of a project. So this is just a screenshot of our Slack, just me like building the first insight tile, which is just like a CTA button, essentially. And I was really excited, so I shared it, and there's 19 replies. I think we found a bug, and that's why we were talking so much. But to bring it back to Laddie's chat about co-creating product strategy, this came from us realizing that not only did we need to build the insights feed, but we needed to make a way to generate enough content that it would remain fresh for our users. We just like couldn't imagine a future where we would have to engage engineers at every single step and therefore like build something new every time. Like that's just not efficient. So part of the product strategy then became to create the tooling that would empower us to actually build the thing. So I don't think that would have happened if the writers did not have such a big voice in that room. So always make sure to engage the people that are actually like doing the thing. The next bit, encourage micro partnerships. I talk to my back-end developers more than I talk to my mom. So I think that's like a pretty common thing in people in tech. So we're always talking. The project is never truly done, I would say. In fact, today we were already like solving new problems. And of course, create space to go off-piste. A lot of these aspects of this tool ended up only coming once we realized the need. And the way you realize the need is by doing the user testing, talking to your fellow people on your team. And we wouldn't have been able to make a successful project if we weren't given that space to actually discuss, and we weren't like, if we were hyper aligned to goals at the end of every term, I don't think it would have turned out like this. Can you hit the next slide? So, exciting part. I wanted to talk about our next collaboration project. So this is something that we're currently working on with the data team. We have at Clio, we have a dedicated data, they're called the Differential Squad, and they're just like a team of analytics engineers and data analysts and product analysts. And their whole mission is to help to empower other squads using their data know-how. So you'll see 2 screens next to each other. On the left, I've asked Clio about my shopping spends, which I've blanked out because it's embarrassing. And then on the right, I've told Clio, I don't know what to do about my shopping spending. Instead, she's picked up on the word spending and given me my spending for the past couple months. What we're hoping to do is harness the engine that is ChatGPT, which, if you don't know, it's this AI making the waves on the internet. But we're hoping to harness its language recognition engine in order to be able to understand what Clio, not only what users are asking, but to frame that in the context of what they've already talked about. So this is an ongoing project with our data team, and I really just wanted to show you because it's quite exciting, and it means that we can help users even better in the future by understanding their questions and actually serving them the data that they want to see. Yeah, I think that is it. Thank you for listening.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. It's 3 phenomenal talks there. Thank you for sharing your experiences and sharing how you work here at Clio across product and UX. We're going to have a brief bit of Q&A here now at the end, approximately 15 minutes. However, I did notice that I forgot to point out one key factor before we started the call, which is the toilets are just located over there if anyone needs to pop for a convenience break. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to pop the Slido code back on the screen so you have the opportunity to add any further questions, and then we'll get some seats set up so that the speakers can answer your questions. So probably 1 minute or so to get all that set up. If you need to pop to the loop, please feel free to do so now. Thanks. Pardon? Yeah. Is that right? Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. 100%.
That's good to go.
Nice. How does this work, James? They just speak straight into it?
Yeah, it should be good to go.
Okay, all right. Excellent. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for sticking around, and I can see lots of people tapping questions in now, which is excellent to see. We've got a few here that have come up to the top. I'm just going to take a perch just here, and then I'll hand the speaker across for the different questions. So we've got the first one here, most likely over for Kev and Nina. What's the most challenging part of working with product managers? You were giggling, I'll go straight to
you. So the question was, what is the
hardest part about working with product
managers? The hardest part? Sometimes their focus is really divided. Sorry, laddie. But like I find, at least at Clio, because it's such a voice-driven product, you have to like really advocate for the voice as a writer. And I imagine like every discipline does that. You have to be like the best representative of your discipline. So I find that like having their time, understanding their priorities so you can be better placed at like presenting your priorities can be challenging. Also, Clio can just be like quite a fast-paced place. So that can be a challenge. Do you have anything to add, Kev?
Yeah, I guess. Thank you very much. I'd probably echo that. I don't think actually that's quite my experience at Clio so much, but I definitely think in past positions, I would certainly have had an issue from the writing perspective of, I think you mentioned it, Laddie, the idea of a trio and writing getting a space within that trio. I think that's definitely an issue I've found in the past. And it's just, I mean, Laddie gave some great tips. So just follow what Laddie said, and you'll definitely. But yeah, I guess it's just making sure that they're included, and that's kind of the relatively simple solution to that.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Next question here, targeted to you, Laddie. It's a very fun talk. How do you keep the number of opportunities limited when partnering up with your UX team?
I think keeping the number of opportunities limited has to come from, I suppose, just the team, the joint team in general. And when I say that I empower the team, I'm also reaching out to other stakeholders, assessing the feasibility of certain opportunities. So for example, paying $12 to get cards shipped to our customers in 2 days. My CEO would probably slap me if I So, no, I'm joking. So I think it's we try and prune the tree and really prioritize based off one, what's feasible, and what we feel like we can achieve to quite a high quality, but also what's within our sphere of influence. And I think that's a super important phrase, because working on a card product, you have so many partnerships with the processor, with the partner bank, with the card network, so there's a lot of things that could be changed, but I think it's very important to remember that we're a product team, and so if we try and restrict to sort of the in-app experience, the physical collateral, the push notifications, emails, how just the experience across a user's journey that's within our sphere of influence, I think that's gone a very long way in helping us prioritize.
Excellent. Thanks, Laddie. Sorry.
You're all good.
You're all good. I didn't put you up on a different speaker. Thank you for that.
Yeah, we had you on a different mic.
All came through. Thanks, Laddie. Brilliant. Okay, so the next question is actually specifically related to Clio. So I guess any three of you could pick this one up. But curious, if Clio's strong personality ties her to a specific demographic, would you need to rethink Clio if she wants to become universal?
Do you want to take that?
Sure. Yeah, I guess the question of the distinct personality and the voice is something we discussed a lot within our team. And it's actually probably something as a company we're probably having a bit of a debate at the moment too. I think where I've certainly always come down on that is that if the USP of the company is the voice, we have to be aware that that voice is going to turn some people off. And it does sometimes, and we kind of accept that. So you will occasionally see some reviews for us that talk about the swearing, for instance. Now, I think we don't necessarily do a whole lot of swearing, but that is something that's going to offend some people. So we have to kind of accept that, and accept that there is potentially a limit. Now, we can talk about CEOs, or CEO may not necessarily want to admit that, but there is possibly going to be a limit to where we can go with such a distinct voice. There are things we also do, or have, I guess, modulated a little bit, which is probably slightly before my time, but would have had a lot of more overtly political gifts, for instance. And that's a decision we've made, is to sort of limit that a little bit too. So there's definitely things we have done as a company to address, I guess, how strong or specific or opinionated Clio might be. But I also think there is a point where we have to accept that if this is our USB and this is who the personality and who Clio is, that's who we are. And we just have to kind of go with that.
It's quite funny hearing you say that. This is something that we definitely debate about a lot within the company. So, for example, you have senior people join and they're like, what is the copy on these screens? And it's something that, as a product manager, over time I've really learned to sort of understand where the writers are coming from, or try to understand what the value is in retaining that tone of voice. However, my personal opinion that also leads into the debate within the company is, if you want to be a Google, Facebook, even bigger than those size of companies, there's going to need to be some level of personalization, and that's all Clio is about. And on the card side, I think we definitely have a tone of voice slider. in terms of dealing with customers at different point in their journeys, at different points in their experience. So, for example, if you have a transaction that's been declined at the store due to insufficient funds, you're not trying to hear Clio start chatting shit. So I think it's those type of situations where we try and sort of dial back on the tone of voice and maintain some level of functionality. So unhappy paths, edge cases, but because it's worth noting that this company was started by a data scientist who definitely believes in in the power of personalization, and I would love to see a future in which Clio sort of is personalized, localized. There's a slider that sort of prevents profanity, because I think that's sort of what really allows us to sort of get to sort of that mass market. But yeah.
Yeah, just to like quote myself. There was a slide where I talked about having user empathy. And like to Laddie's point, a lot of that is understanding the set and setting in which you speak to users about a thing. So as writers, a lot of us come from a background in like character writing and script writing. So we understand that this person who is Clio will not address every situation the same. So roast mode, which is like our most like, Clio's had 3 tequila shots deep, roasting you on your spending. That's like quite the most bombastic version of it. But then in these high emotional points, like if your card is rejected, Clio can then tone it back to like quite an empathetic tone of voice. So it's about like the UX voice is quite character driven, and I'm pretty proud of that. So it would be cool to see, to Laddie's point, a slider that allows you to adjust it on a day-to-day basis, but I think it's what makes her powerful. And if you keep in mind the landscape of fintech and this banking industry, which is like quite dry a lot of the time, that does make us stand out remarkably.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I've just noticed today that we also have the opportunity to launch this box around and answer any questions in the room. So I will just stop and just see, does anyone in the room have anything they would like to ask for our panelists here? Yes, brilliant. Please feel free to speak it.
Cool. Hi, I'm Dolly. I did want to follow up on that question. It got me thinking when you were talking about the tone of voice, and I have seen some people be put off by Clio's tone of voice. And it got me thinking about OnlyFans pimp factories, like they're sort of online pimps who will get a girl's Instagram and say, we'll create an OnlyFans account for you, and we will chat to different types of people. And one of the things I read in this article was, depending on who the demographic was, they had a specific tone of voice sort of chatbot that worked with that demographic. So if they were Gen Z or Gen X, which one's the young one now? Z. They would use like lots of emojis and stuff, but if they were talking to boomers, they would have a very different characteristic. And I was wondering if you'd ever thought of having like a limited, say 3 different types of tones of voice that people could just select on how they wanted to be communicated with or responded to.
Yeah, I guess we've never gone that far down that route. We've certainly discussed that. I guess the slider is the most obvious example of that, which we have certainly discussed. Beyond that, I'm not sure. I mean, it's obviously it's a tricky thing to pull off as well, right? So you'd be effectively having 3 different tones of voices or 2 different tones of voices depending on the audience, and so it becomes quite difficult to manage, I guess. It's certainly something we have discussed, and I guess the points you're making around that the idea of a slider is the closest thing we've gotten to that. We have certain things where it's more to do with data specifically, if you want your data revealed or not, things like that, which we have sliders for as well. So there's little things like that, like little bits of personalization we've done, but I don't think we've ever gone further than that.
Yeah, it's actually so interesting that you brought that up, because I've seen myself in our user calls, in our testing, the boomers respond the most to our tone of voice sometimes. And I don't know if it's just because it's by virtue of them being in the landscape for the longest time and they're like, wow, this is quite incredible. But oftentimes we do market a lot to Gen Z. A lot of it, for example, we had a recent mode that was hyping users up about student loans or something like that. It was student loans mode. And that was obviously targeted towards Gen Z, but beyond that, you actually have a lot of older people who really respond to our app. So it's always going to surprise you, which is pretty cool, I think.
Yeah, so just to follow up one other thing on that, I guess, as well, which is also to point out, it's really hard aiming stuff at Gen Z as well.
Yeah.
Like we have, like another thing we've recently decided is that GIFs are just for old people. You know,
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of GIFs out there. It's like it's for old people now. You know, so that's something we have to do as well. It's like, okay, so how we have to keep on top of like, and this is something we actually have genuine discussions about as a team. It's like, okay, what words should we no longer use? What GIFs should we no longer use? What emoji should we no longer use, for instance? So even just keeping up with that in itself is.
Remember the cowboy hat controversies?
That was an issue, yeah.
Can I just note and state for the record that the swear swords, that's what we call the UX writers in our team. They've got a very strong voice and they're very opinionated, and it's so lovely to see that sort of flow into the product. But I think what you're talking about, that level of sort of selection on a user's part, is also quite a tough data science problem to try and solve for, and something that we hopefully want to try and evolve. And they've got a whole piece around user financial understanding. So if you could think about all the possible inputs that you would ever need to train a model about what a user's financial picture looks like, I think we would want to sort of cater our tone of voice. So Swear Swords working with the data science team to really think about, well, who is this person and what is their situation right now and how should I be speaking to them? So without sort of revealing too much. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you for those inputs. I think we'll probably finish off with just a couple more questions. Go ahead. Let me pass you there. Thank you.
Cool. So I'm kind of noticing you're a British company serving a US market. Only one of you is from North America. Like, have you got examples of where you've used British English in the wrong way? And how difficult is that using common language with different geography, where obviously British English can mean different things in the US and so on.
I can take that.
Excellent.
Yeah, so fun fact, I was hired at Clio because they thought I was American. I'm not. But yeah, it was an interesting challenge. There's subtleties to it, and a lot of it we're getting way better at now because we have some American writers on our team that we work with remotely. Thanks, COVID. So a lot of it is like that subtleties, like I haven't is quite a British thing. Or like, yeah, there's just like certain way, or like I've not is a British way of saying I haven't, basically. So it's like understanding those subtleties. A lot of times we'll, like as Laddie and Kevin were saying, the writers have a very good relationship, and we'll always post on Slack and be like, do Americans say hours, HRS? So it's like, keeping those lines of communication open. One interesting challenge was like, also for me moving to the UK, is that Brits love to swear. And so we had to like, not tone it down, but only use specific curse words that would not offend American sensibilities. So like the practicalities of that are quite, I think we're getting better at it every day. But yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I guess the thing just that there's 7 of us in the team now, and 4 of the team is from North America and 2 is from the US as well. So that's something we're obviously very aware of too. I'd also say, like, for me personally, it is a bit of a linguistic nightmare being Irish. So there's like Hiberno English, which is our own version of how we speak it, and I've got to modulate that to UK and then to the US. So there's a lot of stuff on that, but we also do document a lot. We've got loads and loads of Notion documents around all this sort of stuff. There's weird ones that crop up a lot of the time as well. Like, there's clearly like obvious ones, trash can and bin and stuff like that. But the date format is actually a really good example of that, for instance. Yeah, because being we actually started in the UK, our date formats were UK date formats, and we actually had to change that to the US. And there's still actually some hard-coded stuff in there that's not necessarily correct. So yeah, it is definitely been a challenge, but it's something we're very aware of, and I think I've tried to shape the team around that as well. Top up, that's a very good example. Yeah, that was something, another example of they don't say top up in the US, so when you have a card, you want to top up your card, it's more transfer of funds to your card. So another good example I think we learned. Yeah.
Something that I found quite surprising though is the level of financial savviness, or like in terms of the technical jargon related to finance. I would say Americans are so much more in the know. So for example, one term that I can think of is a direct deposit, or you know, you'd have loads of pushback within the team, sort of in terms of how we're trying to explain things, whereas what we see is that it's actually common UX. So many people have popularized so many of these terms, and somehow our customers feel very comfortable using very highly technical finance terms, which has been a big learning for us.
Excellent, brilliant. I think we've probably got time for about one more question. I can either take it from online or if there's anyone in the room here. Excellent, all right. I'll go for the top of the list online. It's targeted to you, Lally. We've got, how does your product kickoff look like? When you're intent on including the wider teams in the process, how do you make this work? Product kickoff.
That's interesting. It changes. I don't believe in templates anymore, because sometimes we would try and, when I was earlier in my career, we would try and just ship the tiniest A/B test, and I'd be like, "What? Why are we doing it? How are we doing it?" Just like a massive one-pager. So I think it depends on the size of what we're trying to release. If it's a super quick experiment, that's actually led by my product analyst with proposals from me, and we try and sort of refine that across the product analyst and the tech lead. However, if it's a bigger feature or something where I need to sort of get buy-in cross-functionally, then we go into sort of I suppose, setting the context around, starting with why we're trying to, I suppose, look at the opportunity that we're looking at, what exactly we're trying to do, and going deeper into insights. And again, to the point of empowering the team, they help with the kickoff docs. So desk research around competitor analysis goes into the insights. Past implementations, there could be some documentation from the tech lead in the PRD, but I think the whole idea is just to set the stage for whoever the audience is. So if it's for my team, I usually end around sort of what we're building, why we're building it, why now, and how we're going to do that, and create the space for people to start peppering me with questions, which is kind of like my least favorite bit, because they poke holes in my thinking, but it helps refine. If it's for the CEO, our leadership team, it varies. So you want to be as brief as possible, and then if you have time with them, just going into more detail and making sure that you've done the proper analysis. So worked with commercial team, worked with the data science team in terms of sizing the opportunity, or trying to get to the fine grain of where we're trying to go. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you again for your phenomenal talks today. Please give a hand for our speakers. Just for those curious online, that is an excited dog at the back there. We don't have people barking. Brilliant. Thank you very much. What we will do now is I'll just close off for those online. Thank you for tuning in. If you have any further questions, please feel free to populate them into the chat on YouTube. And likewise, please connect with these fine individuals. I'm sure we'll be happy to field any questions following the session. Thank you again for your time, and thank you everyone for joining us here today. We do have still some pizzas and drinks for some kind of closing networking if anyone's interested in that. So thank you again. And final point as well, any feedback following the session, greatly to receive it, take it on board, and help us continue to improve our Product Tank events. Thank you. Well done. Really, really good.